Hello everyone, welcome to today's panel on communicating and marketing Plan Vivo projects. I'm Jen Stebbing, I'm your moderator for the session. I'm an independent climate and nature communications consultant. One of my clients is actually on this panel, Carbon Tanzania, and I'm also trustee of the Plan Vivo board. I wanted to start by saying, and maybe it's expected coming from me, that communications in the voluntary carbon market has never been more critical. With its recent evolutions, particularly with the heightened focus on integrity and transparency, telling the story of your project has become almost as important as the project itself. This is really because it's a market where buyers can't physically touch the carbon credits, as we know, and so they have to rely on effective communication to convey the value and impact that the credits represent. We know that's no easy task. It requires clarity, consistency, and a deep understanding of the audiences we're speaking to. So for anyone operating in this space, communications should not be an afterthought. It needs to be embedded in the core of an organization, and our panelists today are going to talk about that. So from the strategic objectives of the business right down to the field teams capturing the daily project stories, communications is really essential. Communications objectives also need to align with your business objectives to ensure that you reach and influence the relevant audiences. In my own communications work, I have a 3-word mantra, which is clear, positive, and consistent. So firstly, clear communications ensures that complex ideas are accessible. Positive communications engages and inspires action, and then consistent communication builds trust and brand recognition over time. One important point to make here that fits in with my positive point and is specific to this market is that we really need to avoid framing things as either or. There's no need to denigrate one solution or approach to make another look better. For example, we've got both a carbon removals project and an avoidance project on the panel today. Both are critical and both are needed. There shouldn't be this kind of pushing them against each other. Whether it's technology versus nature-based solutions or project level versus jurisdictional action, they're all important. The focus should be on how these solutions complement each other to address the scale of the climate crisis. Over the next 55 minutes, we'll be hearing from our panelists about how they've tackled some of the communication challenges they've found in the VCM, sharing strategies that have worked, discussing key elements of effective communication plan. We'll also explore the role of Plan Vivo and how it can support projects in communicating their value to the market, and we'll close with an open Q&A session. So get your questions ready. I think you can submit them via the Q&A box on the left-hand side of the screen. That's more than enough from me. We'll get started. I'll direct the first question to all of you brilliant panelists. Please can you make sure you introduce yourselves when you start to talk, as you'll do that much better than I would. So first question, please. And I'd love you all to answer, but maybe Joe, you could start. How have you seen effective communications impact your projects in terms of buyer engagement or project success?
Thanks, Jen. So briefly, I'm Joe Anderson. I'm one of the co-founders of Carbon Tanzania, and I am responsible for the financing and sales at the company. And of course, sales essentially means an effective communication strategy to support the buyers, which is really what the question is aimed at, of course. We at Carbon Tanzania, as Jen mentioned, we worked together on developing a comprehensive communication strategy to support our marketing and sales. And it really starts with understanding, what are your business objectives, of course. Now, the example that I think I'm going to use focused on the Plan Vivo project that Carbon Tanzania has developed with the Hadza and Tatoka communities of the Yaida Valley in northern Tanzania, is the example of the project being submitted for and winning the UNDP Equator Prize. It sounds quite straightforward in a sense that the project won a prize, but what went into that was actually a very long and a sort of comprehensive construction of the communication strategy, where the target was set to enter the project to win a high-profile prize, which we felt would meet the requirements of the communication strategy, which one of the core goals of that was to establish the project's integrity and quality and its impacts in a somewhat third-party sense. And that gives the global voluntary carbon market and the buyers who are purchasing the credits another source of comfort when they're actually investing in the project by buying credits. So this effort that was put in by the communications team to enter the project for the Equator Prize, as I say, was not just a whimsical sort of response to an email or an invitation to enter the Equator Prize, but it was the result of a well thought out and planned strategy where we identified the need for carbon projects to go way beyond certification often, to establish their brand authority, to establish the quality that they're bringing in a way that is somewhat sort of validated in a third-party sense. And that really turned out to be an extremely successful strategy. Other things we put in place weren't so successful, so I'm simply giving you an example of a very successful result of our communication strategy. And what it meant was that we could combine all of the efforts that we put into creating communications around the project, including collating great imagery, video, all of the content, written and digital content, which supports the application. Was then very useful for us and our teams to then feed into the process of actually receiving the prize, which of course requires one of the community members to travel to New York during the United Nations Congress, which of course is happening this week or next week, obviously concurrently with New York Climate Week. So the reason I feel this is a really good example, of course, is because it does bring together all of the elements of a really well-designed and comprehensive communication strategy. And it shows that while you're putting in place all these building blocks, and some of them aren't having any immediate outcomes, when it does come together, and something like this happens, and in this case winning a reasonably well-respected global prize, it gives, obviously it gives the project great kudos. The people involved were thrilled and very excited to have one of their community members traveling to New York. But of course, as I said, the commercial end of it is served quite powerfully, because the buyers obviously can point to that as another mark of quality, and it supports their commitments, as I say, to using carbon credits in their, hopefully in their net zero strategy, or in their sustainability strategy, however they're communicating it. So for me, that is a pretty powerful example of when communications strategies really come together and work for everyone involved.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, that's if everyone sees Joe separately, you've definitely got to ask him the story of the Hudser in New York, because whilst not a comms thing, it's very interesting. Very good story. Will, I wondered if you could add your reflections to that point and introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course.
First, please.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jen, and really great to be here. My name is Will Sheldon. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Taking Root. We improve farmer livelihoods by growing trees and removing carbon. And our flagship project is the community project in Nicaragua. We're working with about 4,000 farmers across about 15,000 hectares, which is being restored with native tree species. And I should say we have obviously a small but mighty team, a mighty marketing team. And I think for us, the benefit of effective marketing and communications, and just over the last couple of years, we did two things, which has really enabled us as a business. The first, and I should stress that this was a business priority, not a marketing and comms priority first, but we really took the time to outline our theory of change as a business, and as a project. And while sometimes I think people think, oh, that's just a marketing and comms thing, it was actually a really strategic business piece of work to really understand how do we solve problems and how do we think. But it had the added benefit from a marketing and communications point of view that it gave us a platform for where every piece of marketing and communications should start. And so that enabled the team amazingly to put out, Jen, you mentioned clear and consistent communications. It gave that platform and has made marketing and communications a lot easier rather than every time coming back to, oh, what is our starting point and what are our key messages? And then more specifically, about the same time, we also, our business is based around selling through reseller partners. I think like many projects, we have a very small sales team. And so we want to enable that sales team much more than just the people themselves. And so we work with a number of reseller partners. And so we really dove into the business objective of, well, how do we create more demand? And if we go through reseller partners, how do we enable them to sell better? And so what that meant was working backwards from the needs of those reseller partners and really outlining, very tangibly what the key messages were to help them sell, what the key documentation was, how we needed to engage to understand their needs. And what that has done over the last couple of years is created an amazing focus around key messages, a whole suite of materials for our sales partners, some of them super unglamorous, like 40-page FAQs to help them write proposals, and some more glamorous things like, really engaging videos that they can use for pitches. But the result of that focus and really focusing on our sales channel, I think, has been three things. The first is it has enabled demand and enabled premium prices. And I think that's one of the big opportunities for Plan Vivo projects by telling our story really effectively. The second is it's mitigated risk in a number of ways. First, by making sure our partners are really well educated so that they're communicating effectively to clients, but also so that we are really clear on our key messages and the information that we have on hand to be able to respond whenever there are any questions about our project. And then the third thing is it's actually created a ton of engagement internally and within our project team because they love seeing their story being told to our partners and out to the world. And that is hugely motivating and has been an amazing feedback loop to then to create that kind of galvanization at the project level as well.
Thanks so much, Will. Yeah, that's fascinating, and you touched on some of the things that I definitely go into a lot with clients and partners and people on those risk mitigation particularly. And I love that you picked up the consistency point. You led in perfectly to Lorenzo there, talking about reseller comms and how difficult it is when you're sort of one step removed, I suppose. So, Lorenzo, would you introduce yourself and just build on what Will's saying and how you can see those sort of effective communications impacts in terms of how you operate?
Sure thing. Thank you first of all, and thanks for having me and for being with all of you. I think, as Will put it, I think it's very important for us. To introduce myself, I'm Lorenzo Curci, the co-founder and chief commercial officer at Earthly. At Earthly, our mission is really to help corporates advance their climate ambitions and support leading nature-based solutions. Earthly is built from really the core of our business is around the trust that our assessment system brings to the market. So we review and assess 106 different data points from carbon, social, and biodiversity. And so that's our real core pillar where we start from. But actually engagement and communication is our secondary pillar. So I think this conversation is incredibly important for us. When we look at the funding gap to nature, we see a huge hurdle that we have to all climb. And so, that engagement strategy becomes really important to try to inform people how important nature-based solutions are, not only in terms of carbon, but in the sense of helping us reach our social ambitions, and our biodiversity goals. And so, when we speak to project developers, not only do we ingest a lot of information from the quality side, but then we need to communicate that story effectively. And for us at Earthly, we've built specific tools, dashboards, customer hubs where the information can be shared to staff and employees. But the drive for us is to ensure that the purchase is not just an annual purchase, but the connection with the project becomes one of a much deeper level where the business can really buy in to the impacts that they're having, not only in terms of carbon, but the social impact and biodiversity impact. And hopefully that's something that can be carried throughout the year, not just a single purchase, but throughout the year. And I think the importance of that done correctly means that a buyer will continue to return to the same product, the same project, and feel a deep-seated sort of connection to the outcomes that they're supporting. And I think that's really important. So, for us, the communication strategy is key, and it's very important to ensure that we can get all the correct information. And as Will said, it can be varied information. I would never be afraid of personal stories to data stories. Allow people such as ourselves to understand, to get as much information to create those stories, because in a way, as Jen said, nothing is too little in terms of the information that we can get and then pass through in the correct way to the clients.
Thanks, Lorenzo. That's I love that idea. That sort of long-term relationship building is so important, isn't it? To get that connection in comms is super critical to make people really, especially with what we're talking about, to make people really feel like they understand and can empathise with some of the issues on the ground. Diana, could you jump in next and talk about it from the Plan Vivo's perspective?
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to have to introduce Plan Vivo in too much detail, as I think hopefully most people joining today will know who we are and what we do, especially if you've been getting involved in the sessions over the last few days. But I'm Diana Wrangham, and I am the communications coordinator at Plan Vivo. I've actually been here for 3 years this week, so quite a nice way to be celebrating my 3-year anniversary. But yeah, you've probably seen some emails floating around from me too. I've been pestering everyone to sign up for this event, so probably nice to put a face to a name. But yeah, I basically lead on the communication strategy for Plan Vivo at the moment. And what that involves is a lot of different things. Obviously, we've got a very large network, as you can see by this event going on, and the people joining from all corners of the world and all kinds of different parts of the sector. So really, we feel that, it's within our remit, and we really need to support projects in terms of comms and marketing as much as we can. We have some projects that have obviously really taken off in terms of their comms and marketing, and have in-house teams and people who are working on this kind of on a daily basis. And we have some other projects who don't maybe have the capacity to be able to communicate so well. So it's kind of looking at how we can help that and how we can support them through communicating Plan Vivo more effectively. And really making sure that we're kind of putting the right people in the right rooms, and making sure that the Plan Vivo message is being shouted out a little bit more loudly within the space. And we've been working on that a lot over the last couple of years. I think also, if anyone joined the regional sessions yesterday for East Africa and Latin America, we're really working on expanding our teams in those areas and making sure that we have people on the ground who understand the local contexts and in turn can understand how to communicate more effectively in those local contexts. And also getting people out and about from our projects into the right rooms and at events and speaking about the work that they're doing on the ground and communicating that as effectively as they can, and really getting those key messages across. And then I think some of the other panelists have touched a little bit on education and awareness, but obviously, we straddle the two sides for projects and the market side too. So it's really understanding how we can help with education and advocacy in the space. And we have a legacy of over 25 years, which is incredibly important to communicate. But I think also it's important to communicate how we have a model that can really move with the times, and is flexible and can adapt to best practice while still kind of keeping our key ethos of communities and a holistic model. And And I think finally, so whenever I think about comms and communicating Plan Vivo projects, I just think about why we're doing it. So I think sometimes we can get a little bit lost in the noise of the space and people looking in on the sector as well. And I think it's really important to just tie back all comms and all marketing to what our mission is and why everyone is working towards, the things we're doing on the ground and why the projects exist, things like that. So yeah, for me, it's always really important to tie back into the why. And then I think from there, it's much more clear to communicate things effectively.
Thanks, Diana. That's really helpful. And yeah, I think that straddling role is really an important one. And also, of course, there is Plan Vivo to communicate as well as all the projects. So consistency there is important amongst all of your audiences. So I just wanted to dive in, and we won't spend too long on the challenges, but I wanted to dive a little bit into the challenges, just given the last 2 years, really, almost, or at least 18 months of kind of negative press on the VCM more generally, and specifically on nature-based solutions. And I wanted to find out from you how you have been kind of what are those challenges, firstly, and how you feel you've been addressing them, and maybe some advice to others about addressing those challenges. So maybe we start with Will this time, and then go around. So
Yeah, I feel like there have been two challenges, or I mean more, but the two main challenges that come to mind from a project perspective. The one hand is this meta narrative, right, that has come out around some of the projects not fulfilling what folks feel are high quality, and so that's really hard as a singular project to know how to battle that, how to put out messages, how to cut through the noise. And it has also at times felt like a debate with not much conversation, and so I think it's hard to know how to engage at times with that, and whether you even do engage directly or you engage indirectly by just kind of putting out your key messages. How have we dealt with that? I think for us, we've dealt with that with really trying to understand, well, where has that negative sentiment come from, and how can we use our experience and the impacts that we've created to demonstrate a beacon of what is possible. And I think that's kind of the opportunity of the challenges is the carbon market 2.0, and this redefinition of high integrity. And so I think what we've really tried to do is position ourselves of look, if the what you're wanting and the market is wanting in terms of quality is changing, which is great, by the way, what does that look like? And trying to position ourselves as if you're talking about community benefits being core to carbon integrity, if you're talking about biodiversity being core to carbon integrity, here is what that looks like, and how can we recreate scale? How can we take some of the positive stories and scale them rather than just focusing on the negative and then bringing kind of everything else down? So I think that's kind of the mentality and approach we've shifted towards. I think the second very real challenge for projects is how to deal directly with some of when they've had media and press scrutiny. I think there have been a number of instances, both outside and within Plan Vivo, of then people in the media picking up on this negative sentiment and story and wanting to write their own. And I think part of the challenge there has been it's not necessarily felt like a fair fight, because press have come in with a view and a story already written before they've engaged with projects. And so there's a choice projects face, which is, do you engage and do you open the doors, which takes a ton of time and effort in the knowledge that it may be all for nothing and just for press to be able to say, oh, we spoke to the project, but we're still going to have a negative narrative without taking into account kind of any of what's been presented in terms of evidence from the project side? Or do you disengage and then run the risk that you're not being part of that story and media telling? And so I think that is a very real challenge for projects, especially because projects have limited resources, and that sort of work takes a ton of time. And so how have we approached that? I think I think, honestly, our view might be changing. Initially, our perspective was we should engage as much as possible anytime. We should fling open the doors. I think now our perspective might be changing, that actually it's about opening the right doors to the right people and the right institutions out there, but not always doing it, and being comfortable with the fact that we're not always necessarily going to engage in a conversation if we don't feel it's going to be productive, just because of the resource intensity that it takes and the need to focus. But I think that's an ongoing challenge. And the other thing we're doing is putting in place a lot of mitigation around that, just to make sure that we have all our project information really clearly documented. We can always turn to evidence to respond to folks, to support our reseller partners in the face of that negative sentiment. So yeah, it's just a couple of reflections of how we've thought about some of those challenges.
Thanks, Will. Yes, I do like the idea of having a bank, almost like a kind of reactive Q&A where you've got various information ready to hand, so you don't have to make it up each time. But Joe, I wondered if you wanted to add that. I mean, I know there's probably a current one you can't talk specifically about, but if you wanted to give some reflections on responding to some of the criticism.
Yes, thanks. I guess I'll focus on the one of the things we identified, a few years ago, as we sensed perhaps that criticism would be, refocused on certainly nature-based carbon credits. We realized that one of the great, well, we all know, I think, that the great strength of Plan Vivo projects is the commitment to community involvement. The entire process is community-led, and with sharing arrangements that are required by the standard, the participation of communities, the co-creation of project activities, all the things we know are extremely positive from the point of view of using the Plan Vivo standard. We feel very strongly that these are really what people are paying for, as much as the individual climate benefits, which are obviously being captured in the issuance process. And we felt strongly that we needed to communicate the community angle as strongly as possible. So I think the challenge was that we realized probably that we could have a great communication strategy, we could put together lots of nice material and kind of put it out there in a conventional sense, on social media, newsletters, and going to conferences. But in the end, of course, the real sort of genuine nature of stories and voices from our communities would be much more compelling. And they're much harder to, for critics, should we say, to really take to task. The issue of carbon accounting is never going to be solved to 100% accuracy. Nobody should pretend that. Science doesn't progress that way. The world isn't, a zero-sum or 100% certainty place. But when an experimental analysis suggests that there would be absolutely no chance of an area being deforested, for example, in the case of a RED project. Meanwhile, people on the ground are experiencing wide-scale land alienation and habitat loss every single day. There's clearly one of those stories is wrong. And I'm afraid the reality is what's wrong is the experimental analysis approach that a few scientists, with some clever AI, and what is variance is what the community is experiencing. That's the reality. There are different types of knowledge in the world, and each type of knowledge has a different validity claim. So, our approach essentially was to focus on trying to support our communities, both the people who we employ as project managers, but also community members who are engaged daily in running the carbon project, to get their voices out there, to get their stories out there. And a kind of a sub-strategy within our communication strategy has been to support people to tell those stories, to get them onto webinars, to have them speak to local media and sometimes even international media. Because the reality is, will the international press actually accuse local communities of just lying about their experience? So I think that's a very powerful way of challenging the narratives that are being set up around, well, it's all completely, it's all smoke and mirrors. The reality is forests are being cut down, habitats being lost, it needs to be protected and or restored. That's what's happening in the world. And to allow, as I say, experimental scientific analyses to suggest otherwise is obviously not in anyone's interest. But we do have to concentrate and invest in bringing community voices to the fore. So that's an example of where we've felt that it's one way of dealing with some of these challenges that, of course, we've all experienced in VCM in the last few years.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think sometimes it feels, doesn't it, from this end, like it's lived experience versus science, which seems crazy. But yeah, I want to bring Diana and Lorenzo in to both answer the question about the challenges, but just kind of put a bias spin on it. So, how is this being received? I mean, we know that some of the negative media and the way that has kind of the market's trended down in that way. So I was just, I'm wondering how it's coming across to buyers, some of these strategies, an excellent strategy, I must say, that Will and Joe are talking about, but how is that coming across, and how are buyers reacting, and what do they need more from communications and projects to communicate? Diana, maybe you could start with you.
I think there's been, from the outside looking on the VCM, I think there's been quite a lot of finger pointing. And I think, there should definitely be a lot more pats on the back. But I think one of the main things that is really important is an education and educating buyers. And I think buyers, they are so much more aware of the opportunities in the voluntary carbon market and what projects they can invest in and what different projects look like. And within that, what Plan Vivo projects stand for. And I think over the last couple of years, we've really had buyers who they come to Plan Vivo because they really want to invest in nature-based projects. And more importantly, they want to invest in nature-based projects with a community focus and with a smallholder-led focus. And that a lot of the time comes from them actually doing research and realizing that, this is an opportunity and it is there in the market. They can invest in those projects and they do exist. And, those sorts of projects have been around for a long time under the Plan Vivo standard and under PV climate. I think also it's about building relationships. So I think, again, on the buyer side, there can be a tendency to sort of buy off the shelf and buy quickly and not really understand the projects that you're buying from. I think there's a massive shift now, and that's changed in the last couple of years for sure. But I think it's like any purchase, right? You have to understand the supply chain and who's on the other end of it, and what that money is going back towards, what that money is going to support. So yeah, I think education, awareness, and building relationships with people in the space is incredibly important. I also think that it's very difficult to communicate the complexities of nature-based carbon projects in short articles, and it's very difficult as well within the society that we live in at the moment of essentially a lot of clickbait and headlines, and maybe shorter attention spans than we used to have. So I think it's also about navigating that. And again, I think that's why it's really important to build relationships in the space. And as Joe and Will were alluding to really kind of make sure that the community voices are at the forefront and that people understand what's going on the ground. And again, I mean, the name of this session is communicating and marketing Plan Vivo projects. It's not communicating and marketing carbon credits. And I think that's really important, is understanding what's behind a carbon credit for buyers, and And as Joe mentioned, with Plan Vivo projects, there's so much more to that, and it's always been about going beyond carbon, which is one of the reasons why they're Plan Vivo certificates and not named as carbon credits. So yeah, that's all incredibly important. And finally, I think just understanding that we have solutions out there, and we're all working towards one collective aim here, and we need to invest in these solutions now, and they are there, and there's always going to be issues somewhere. Somebody's going to find them, I'm sure, because we're dealing with human projects, and projects that are global, and projects that deal with complex ecosystems globally. But I think we can kind of delay and dither all we want, but if we really want change, we're going to have to invest in these solutions now.
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, absolutely. And I do like that clarification on the project, on the session title. So Lorenzo, if I could just bring you in just to quickly answer that question, and then we'll move to the Q&A. So if you've got more questions, we've got some great ones coming so far, but do add those in. Yes, so Lorenzo, just if you could talk about those challenges a bit from the buyer perspective, that would be really helpful, and then we'll go to the Q&A.
Yeah, super. I think from our perspective, what we saw in the market was really we saw a lot of volume coming out, but actually, in terms of dollar value, the market stayed relatively on par. And I think what we saw is a shift to quality. I think, as we've alluded to, there's been a real move to VCM 2.0, and I think that's really clear. We're all driving for more quality, and I think there's what we're trying to see from the buyer side is how do we communicate all together that this market can be trusted. And I think from our perspective, what we've seen is really buyers wanting to have more information, wanting to have a body such as ourselves provide more detailed research and analysis, deep due diligence on projects, so that they could de-risk their investments. In a lot of cases, even the big corporates, that have a lot of manpower within that, are asking for our support, and I think it's really important because they want to help. There's a clear objective to do their part, but I think often there's this reputational risk they could have. So how do they protect themselves as much as possible? So that's really what we've seen, is actually more companies that are interested, looking for more trusted projects, and projects that can fit this sort of high quality of carbon, social, and biodiversity aspects. And that's what's actually so wonderful about the Plan Vivo projects, is they do so much. And I think also there's been a shift away from what we've seen from people that were just simply buying on the spot market on Vero or Plan Vivo or Gold Standard. And we've actually been in a fortunate position where we can actually, for the first time, educate clients on Plan Vivo. And actually, in one particular case, for one of the largest consultancies in the world, we approved the Plan Vivo system for the first time, because previously they were looking at other registries. So, if we can continue to communicate the trust and the different levels of validation that we have to prove out what the projects are doing, then not only can we achieve a premium price for the projects that are doing this work, but we can continue to drive sales there, and I think that's really important. And I think that what we're seeing is that will continue. I think even from a regulatory point of view, we saw in the California laws that people purchasing credits should have those validated by third parties and things like that. So there's a continuous level of verification which we'll need, and I think that's where that amazing communication from project developers to be able to provide data, to provide this communication, is really important. So yeah, I think that's something that we've definitely seen from the buyer side to build that confidence back up.
Super, thanks, Lorenzo. That's really helpful. I'm going to move now to the Q&A part of this. And we have a question, which is, what is Plan Vivo's strategy to make the standard better known worldwide and promote its USPs and differentiating itself from Vera? So I'm going to turn that over to Diana, but I would love Joe and Will, if you're able to come in very quickly after Diana speaks, just to say how you talk about your projects that have Plan Vivo and how you differentiate yourselves sort of from the project side as well. So Diana, first, if you want to answer that question.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say I don't want to answer that one on my own, so I'm pleased you said that. And the reason being because I think Plan Vivo as a foundation, we have so many people in our network and so many partners we work with, and increasingly more projects in our portfolio. So I think it's about, I think I alluded to it before, but I think it's really about putting the right people in the right rooms to represent us as well, because I could go and speak at events and talk about Plan Vivo till the cows come home, but I don't think that I'm going to be the best person to do that. I think it's going to be the people who are doing the work on the ground, and community members who are involved in projects, the project developer partners we work with, our reseller partners as well. Lorenzo's just said, it's all about educating buyers who come to Italy, come to our other reseller partners too. And I think, it's about really understanding who's going to be the best person to convey messages. And we are really working on that. We want to get more people in, into the big conferences and onto panels and really show, the key work that's being done on the ground and why it's important within local contexts. And again, I mean, our work with regional expansion, so hiring, recruiting people in various countries. So we've got a really strong East Africa cohort now, Latin America cohort. We're working on really strengthening our presence in the Pacific as well with regional ambassadors. And I think also working with governments too, understanding the regulatory frameworks and the policies in different countries, and also showcasing our projects that have been successful and have been pioneers in various places. And we have quite a few of those in our portfolio. In the blue carbon space, in the Pacific, we've got a number of first-time projects in various countries, and in East Africa as well. The guys on the panel today, Joe and Will, prime example of pioneering projects in different parts of the world, and the ability to look at why those projects have been successful and replicate and expand that success. So I think with Plan Vivo, there's so many people involved. It's not just us sitting in our office in Edinburgh, and hopefully it will continue to not just be us sitting in our office in Edinburgh. So I think for us, as I say, it's about getting the right people to convey the right messages, definitely.
Super, thank you. We've got loads of questions and now not huge amounts of time. So I'm going to ask people just to keep their answers as short as possible, although I'm not saying that anything you have been saying is superfluous, because it's all interesting stuff. But just to keep mindful. So Will and Joe, I wanted one of you or both of you wanted to jump in just in talking about how you, I mean, maybe, with Joe, you having other kinds of projects, but how you kind of use that Plan Vivo stamp, I guess, to differentiate your projects.
Shall I jump in? Great. No, I mean, very briefly, in one sense, it's very simple for us, because when we talk about the foundation of Carbon Tanzania, we essentially are saying to people, listen, our own design principles, our own, strategic and philosophical approach to this whole enterprise of creating value in natural assets through, in this case, carbon revenues, is very much tied up with Plan Vivo and their approach that the standard lays down. The IDA project was our very first project. It was it is the genesis. Of course, the principles on which Plan Vivo are founded almost entirely match the principles that we've founded Carbon Tanzania on. So for us, it's quite straightforward. That's the story we tell. and all the stuff I said at the beginning about the focus on community and involvement and the co-creation is all part of that. So yeah, that's the simple answer. You know, we always talk about our genesis being very much founded on the principles of the Plan Vivo standard.
Thank you. Will, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things we would love to see, and I think it's a collective effort from Plan Vivo. I love, Lorenzo, what you were saying about like building Plan Vivo into requirements is core. I think some of the biggest opportunities around building that demand, which then can help drive supply, get higher prices, get more money to communities, is getting Plan Vivo on that list of approved standards. We've seen, for example, recently like Symbiosis Coalition coming out. And I would love to start seeing Plan Vivo on those lists, because those big buyers, they're what set the trends in the market. Many buyers don't have carbon removal teams, and so they look to those large buyers and what they're doing, and then they just put that into their requirements. And so I think there's probably, to your point, Dan, of kind of like the right people in the right rooms. There's probably something like 20 people that, with the right engagement and the right advocacy, getting Plan Vivo onto those lists, I think would be transformational in terms of bringing Plan Vivo into the mainstream, and positioning all these things we've talked about and why it makes sense for it to be on those lists. I think that would make a transformational difference for Plan Vivo projects and communities as well.
Thanks, Will. We've got another question, that says, really interested in the point from Lorenzo about creating buyer connections to projects. Any top tips or examples on how to do this? So Lorenzo, I'll turn that one to you, but perhaps you could also briefly include how you talk about Plan Vivo and the differentiators with it within that answer.
Sure. So I think to take the first start of the answer, I think one of the advantages for us in a way is that because we do such a deep analysis over 106 different data points, we can actually pull out a lot of the information from the projects. And what we really try to do from a buyer perspective is to match the values of that buyer with the values of the project. So what we're really trying to do is create a very transparent and honest conversation that the buyer can really easily communicate. And if the buyer, a lot of people are supporting particular SDGs, or if they're in the food industry or in the education sector, they'll have these values. Some you might have to pull out a little bit more, but other businesses really have these core principles and values that they wish to achieve, help with their staff, communicate to their shareholders and customers. And so if we can match those values to the values of the project, then you can have a much more deep-seated conversation. And for them, it's much easier because they get that. They can say, okay, our value is education. We've been funding schools and sending, equipment. And actually, look how cool the project that we're supporting. Yes, it delivers carbon and biodiversity impact, but it is also doing that same thing. So I think finding those customers that have that deep-seated connection does facilitate a conversation that can move beyond carbon and can be also more consistent. I hope that sort of answers the question there. In terms of the other question, I think for Plan Vivo, you have this great advantage, and I think both Joe that so much of the backbone of Plan Vivo is built on this community equity sharing, and I think that's really fundamental. We do need to get it through more businesses. Even though it's been around, the other registries have had more, seem to have a lot more stakeholder, engagement with these larger corporates. But I would say that as people are looking for quality, the other thing is also variety. And I think as Plan Vivo continues to bring in more projects, international projects across different methodologies, there'll be an ability to go in and actually find these right projects, understand what's available. So I think it's twofold. One is, most importantly, the quality, but also having that deeper pool of projects really will help. And I think the communication, if we all sing from the same hymn sheet, we will get Plan Vivo at the top of the agenda. I think I'm sure of that.
Thank you. Reinforcing my consistency point there. And I love that point about values messaging. Sorry, about values matching. I think we could always do a lot more than that, not only in kind of communicating and with buyer relationships, but within the organizations that we work in themselves. But yeah, so thank you, Lorenzo. We have another question, which it sometimes feels like the media are only interested in negative narratives. How can we get more positive stories covered out there? I mean, this is kind of, for me, the one of the questions I get asked, it feels like almost on a daily basis. And listening to what journalists say, of course, there is the human negativity bias, and certainly headlines are written with that in mind. People will click more on negative headlines than positive ones. But I think also journalists get they do have this bias within themselves, that they don't want to be seen to be doing puff pieces. And whilst we would say this is not a puff piece, this is what's reality, this is a lived experience, in Joe's words, they don't see the news value in that. They see the news value in the negative side, which is a shame, but that's kind of how journalism has always operated. So yeah, it's a really tough one, and it's something that I think most communications professionals have been working on for years. And I think some of it is just we've got to get those stories out through our direct channels, and we can't necessarily rely on the media to do that. But yeah, who else wants to jump in on that? Joe, maybe you have something to add.
Yeah, I guess so, Jen. I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm fortunate in the sense that I did work in the media in London for a few years before I decided to escape to Africa. So I do know how it works. And so it doesn't surprise me that people are looking for stories which are critical. That's the key. Good journalism is critical. So of course we have to expect that the elements of any particular economic sector that they look at, or any particular project, or in our case, nature-based projects, they're going to be the elements that can be critiqued. They're not there to simply write puff pieces, as you say, whether there's good news to be reported or not. So I don't think we need to fool ourselves. But what I would say is that Will kind of talks about this a little bit. We do need to talk to the right people, and I think we need to information, but also be quite careful about how we talk about what we're doing, and also be honest about what we can answer and what we can't. I think there's a real temptation to try and give all the answers, or especially as a project developer, to be expected to be able to give all the answers, solve all the problems, and to be accountable for all the potential criticism of the market. And I just don't think that's the reality. I think we have to be better at understanding what we can say and what questions we can answer credibly. And also just understand mainstream press reports on economic sectors and all sorts of activities across society. And they are looking for the things that go wrong, whether it's in the education system or the health system or the postal service. They're not reporting when letters get delivered on time. They're reporting on how the post office has screwed over all of their postmasters. Quite rightly, of course. But the point is, for us, we do need to concentrate on our own channels, on our own industry and our own sectors and our own customers, and make sure that we are being robust about what we're doing, being honest about how we're recording and reporting on what we're doing, at least to the people that we really need to serve, which is the market, the and all the other commercial actors within our ecosystem. The mainstream press will have to work out what this sector is. And in the meantime, as I say, we should be honest about what we can do in terms of engaging with them. And I think that's the kind of the smarts that we all have to evolve as project developers. And of course, the issue is the kind of people who've gone into this sector have gone into it because we love wildlife, we love conservation, we love we love natural ecosystems, and we hope that we can create a win-win for local communities and nature. We didn't go into it because we were strategic geniuses thinking about communications and media strategy. So there is a potential and real gap there for many people working in the sector. But I think recognizing the fact that mainstream media is not something that we can expect to be, necessarily a productive channel for communication is important.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, that's a very good point to bear in mind. We all went into this for different reasons. So yes, moving on to question 6, I think. There's a question saying, what are the core marketing materials you'd recommend every Plan Vivo project should have to communicate? Dan, I want to start with you, but I feel that we could probably get some good input from the other panelists, particularly maybe Lorenzo's on the buyer side. And I just wanted to share what I think. I mean, other than pictures and videos, which I think should be standard, I think infographics can be hugely helpful. I think getting a good infographic where you're really showing how either the project works, or the approach, or the theory of change, or something like that, can really show a lot of information in a short time. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. But Diana, if you want to jump in next.
Yeah, so I can just quickly add in. So we're working on comms and marketing materials for the Project Accelerator, the Plan Vivo Project Accelerator. So there's going to be a whole module on comms and marketing, and helping projects to understand what materials are maybe really necessary and needed. I know Will mentioned earlier in the session that they have some really nice resources made. I think a deck for investors is really handy to have. I think also just very high quality and high resolution images and videos, and interviews with people on the ground, project stories from people on the ground, the impact, things like that. And I think, visual stuff is incredibly important. And also just to add that visual stuff can be captured really easily on smartphones, and that's something that we're definitely going to be communicating a lot in the Plan Vivo Project Accelerator, that you can have really high res and high quality images and resources and visual content, and you don't need to spend loads of money, and you can market it freely. Social media is brilliant and amazing nowadays, the stories that we can put out there. So yeah, if anyone as well who's watching is one of our projects or pipeline projects and has ideas, suggestions, please get in touch. We want to make sure that resource pack for projects in the accelerator is as good as it can possibly be. So yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Thanks, Diana. Well, we only got probably less than 2 minutes left. So Lorenzo, if I could come to you for just the buyer's perspective on what's important to have in a kind of project communications pack, that would be really helpful, and
Sure.
I think will probably be at time.
I think the key, which I think can't be overlooked, is just the organization side. First of all, I think make it very easy for people to access. Have an up-to-date, shared drive where these can be found. I think it's often strange to be mentioning that, but it's just that level of organization really helps. I think I agree with all the points that Diana said. I think have a clear and concise way that that someone can do this, but do it regularly. So almost try to focus on 2 or 3 pillars. So okay, we need to have a people story, potentially a biodiversity story. So try to find which pillars are right for you and build on those consistent messages, and make sure that information can then be easily shared. And I think those are just the really key steps that someone could take. Then it's on to the other, the buyer side, people like ourselves, to then use that. But if we're always having to communicate and ask for stuff, it just makes it that much harder. So I think, organization, find out your key pillars, and ensure that consistency is there, and you can have a leader in charge of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I think that's all very clear. I hope it was super helpful. I think we're going to end here so that we don't run over. Thank you so much to our brilliant panelists. It's been fascinating listening to what you've all had to say. And I hope, yeah, thanks everybody, the audience, for listening, and hope to see you again sometime.